So, when you look up at the night sky and see the moon in all its glory, don't you ever think to yourself, how did you get here? Or how about when? Why do we only see one side of you? It is very unusual for small planets such as the Earth with weak gravitational fields to have such a massive satellite as we do. And in general, when a planet does have satellites, those satellites are much smaller than the planet itself. The presence of our moon is not just a celestial companion, it's a vital force shaping life on Earth. Imagine a world drastically altered, perhaps non-existent without its influence. The moon's role in stabilizing Earth's tilt is crucial for maintaining a balanced climate. Without this stabilizing force, Earth's tilt could fluctuate drastically, leading to scenarios ranging from a lack of tilt, resulting in no seasons, to a significant tilt, resulting in extreme weather and potential ice ages. Now, considering the moon's impact on our planet's climate stability, one might wonder, who or what occupies the moon? And how did it become so integral to our lives? Here we have 4 theories. Well, 5 really, but the 5th is a combination of the first 4. Number 1, the capture theory. The solar system formed from tidal interactions between the sun and a low-density protostar. The sun's gravity extracted materials from the protostar, which would then have collapsed to form the planets. Number 2, the accretion theory. The Earth and the moon were formed out of dust, particles in a gaseous environment. Now the problem with this is, if formed this way, the moon would share similar qualities the Earth has. For instance, an iron core, or maybe spinning on an axis. Number 3, the fission hypothesis. The Earth had been spinning so fast that some material broke away. Apparently rocks from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Now, the thing is, moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, and apparently these rocks began to orbit the planet. Number 4, the giant impact theory. The moon was formed during a collision between the Earth and another small planet about the size of Mars, Theia. Now, upon impact, the outer layers of the Earth were ripped off, leaving a molten ball, and Theia was demolished. The debris field over the next 100 years coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system. Number 5, Synestia. Led by the researchers at the University of California and Harvard, the moon's origins as it forming after a large object collides with the Earth around 4.5 billion years ago. The Synestia, a spinning cloud of vaporized rock, formed a torus, a donut shape, by spinning rapidly, and the moon formed on the edge of the torus. In the realm of geometry, a torus emerges as a surface created by rotating a circle through a revolution in the 3D space around an axis the same plane as the circle. Regardless of what we just discovered, still doesn't seem like we're any closer to the truth. If the Earth and the moon were formed together, then why such a big discrepancy between the two? For example, Neptunium-237, Uranium-236. Found on the moon, these are radioactive elements not found anywhere in nature. To see them, we would have to create them. Titanium, chromium, and zirconium are rare on Earth, but are found in abundance on the moon. These metals are strong, resistant to corrosion, and ideal for reinforcing. In the 1970s, the Saturn V launch vehicle weighing 15 tons was crashed into the moon, 100 miles away from the previous seismometer. When the vehicle made impact with the equivalent of 11 tons of TNT, NASA scientists said the moon reacted like a gong and continued to vibrate for 3 hours and 25 minutes to a depth of 25 miles. Ken Johnson, supervisor of data and photo control during their Apollo missions under NASA's contracted company, shared with Who Built the Moon author Alan Butler that the moon exhibited bell-like ringing and precise wobbling, resembling gigantic hydraulic damper struts. This phenomenon explains the consistent vibrations whenever the moon approaches the Earth. In 1972, a meteor impact equivalent to 200 tons of TNT created profound shockwaves within the moon's interior, yet none returned.
You hear that? That whistling sound? We've had testimony from some very credible people. This is Carl Wolf. Carl Wolf was with Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, almost 15 years ago now. He's given some incredibly compelling, persuasive, consistent testimony about his own experience in 1965. He was a young guy, he had a top secret crypto clearance at a Tactical Air Command at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. On one occasion that year, he was assigned to an NSA facility. He thought it was NASA, because he didn't know what the NSA was in 1965. He thought they had said NASA, but it was an NSA facility to do some equipment repair. While he's there, he's talking with another airman about how they would obtain images, digital images, from the lunar orbiter. This is a totally new technology at the time. It was fascinating to him, and they're just chatting. And somehow, at one point, this other guy says, oh, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. Carl Wolf got frightened, and he's mentioned this many times in his interviews, because he knew he wasn't cleared for this information. He thought, this is not a good situation for me. I can get into a lot of trouble. The guy then brings out the mosaic. You know how they take the satellite images strip by strip, and they put together this mosaic, and he's showing it to him. He's got it out there. And according to Carl Wolf, this mosaic showed all kinds of geometric shapes, towers, spherical buildings, something that he thought looked like radar dishes, large structures. And again, he was scared, and it took him more than 30 years to come out and discuss this in the late 1990s.
At any rate, I was in a color lab one day when my boss, Staff Sergeant Taylor, came over to me and said that they were having a problem with some equipment on the base, and it was the first lunar orbiter program, where they had a mission to pretty much locate the first landing sites for the 1969 lunar mission for the astronauts. So at any rate, he said they were having some problem with equipment over there. It was a similar equipment that we had. It was computerized contact printing equipment. And he wanted to know if I would go over and take a look at it. And he said to me, it's an NSA facility. And at the time, I didn't know what NSA was. I was pretty naive, and I thought he said NASA. So in my mind, for a long time, I thought it was a NASA facility that I'd gone to. But I remembered him saying NSA and converting it in my own mind to NASA. You know, he told me how everything worked. He showed me the equipment where the digital information came in, where it was converted to photographic images. They were doing 35mm strips of film at that time, which were then assembled into 18.5 by 11-inch mosaics, they were called. There was a digital signature and a grayscale on every 35mm strip. And those strips were from successive passes around the moon, and they would take and build up a photograph. They would scan one section of the moon, then another and another, and then they would get a larger image. So this mosaic then would be put in that contact printer, and that was then a print that was issued to whomever, the press, the scientist, whatever, wherever that was intended to go. So he was showing me how all this worked, and we walked over to one side of the lab, and he said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. And at that point, I became frightened, and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. I was fascinated by it, but I also knew that he was overstepping a boundary that he shouldn't be stepping over. I realized that he was telling me this information because he didn't have anybody else to talk to. Now, probably in that laboratory, he was probably one of the few enlisted people, and he was a worker bee. And he had a high-level security clearance, obviously, but he couldn't share that information with anybody else. And in those days, we didn't. When you had your security clearance, you took it seriously. It isn't like today where people don't take these things seriously. We had a different set of morals and ethics and values. That's the way we were raised, and we stayed bound by those agreements.
We have the testimony of another Disclosure Project witness, Donna Hare, also equally compelling. She had a secret clearance. This is early 1970s for a NASA subcontractor, Philco Ford, and was shown a satellite photograph of a distinct UFO, and had it explained to her that this technician's job was to airbrush any evidence of UFOs out of photographs for NASA before they were made public. She heard, this is secondhand, but seems to be legit, from other employees at the Johnson Space Center, that some of the astronauts had seen extraterrestrial craft on the moon. Now, this is in the early 70s, so the moon landings had taken place by then.
This day, that particular day, I walked into the photo lab in the restricted area, and this was between missions. One of the gentlemen I had been friends with, and I still talk to occasionally, he pointed my attention to one area of this mosaic. It was one panel of a mosaic, which are several panels put together to form a larger picture. And these were either, I believe they were satellite pictures. I'm not sure, they were aerial, looking down. And I said, this is really interesting. He explained everything. And then he, with a smile on his face, he said, look over there. And I looked, and in one of the photo panels, I saw a round white dot. And at the time, it was very crisp, very sharp lines on it. And I said to him, what is that? Is that a dot on the emulsion? And then he's grinning, and he says, dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. And there was a round shadow at the right angle, at the correct angle, the sun shining on the trees. I saw pine trees. I didn't see a coastline. I don't know where this was. But I looked at him, and I was pretty startled because I'd worked out there several years and never seen anything like this, never heard of anything like this. And I said, is this a UFO? And he's smiling at me, and he says, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. What I knew he meant was it was, but he couldn't tell me. So I said, what are you going to do with this information? And he said, well, we always have to airbrush them out before we sell them to the public. And I was just amazed that they had a protocol in place for getting rid of UFO pictures. So as a precaution, they were put in quarantine for a little while. This particular man was in quarantine with them and was part of their debriefing. He said that a lot of them talked about their experience in seeing these craft follow them. I believe there was 3 on the moon when they landed. And I think, and this is the best of my memory, that the code word was Santa Claus. One gentleman that I knew very well was in quarantine with some of the astronauts. He said just about every one of them has seen things when they went to the moon that were, and in fact, one said that they were there. Craft were on the moon at that time. And this man has disappeared off the face of the earth. I've tried to find him, but I have his name. I've given to Dr. Greer. I'm sure he can find him. But a lot of the astronauts are told to keep it quiet, and they're good Americans too. I mean, it comes under the guise of national security. It was very critical that we do this perfectly. We had also simulations before the mission that would generate what they expected the craft to do. The lights would, on the 10 by 20 foot screen in the control center, they would have these projected up there, and a light would go off going the pathway of the different, this is really one continual line, but it's done on different scales that we had to do. The light would continue on, and if the light varied, which represented real-time information coming back from the spacecraft.
And of course, this is very much in line with the story that is attributed to Neil Armstrong. Michael Schratt mentioned this yesterday. This came from the author Timothy Good. I spoke with Timothy about this personally, and Timothy told me about the source of this. This is a woman who's a friend of his. She's no longer alive, unfortunately. Tim said to me she was as rock solid as you could ever get, and she essentially eavesdropped on a conversation that Neil Armstrong was having at an event where this other individual said essentially, so what really happened on the moon? And Armstrong said, well, yes, we've been warned off. This is a paraphrase, but there were craft there. Enormous and menacing was the word he apparently used. Probably was enough to, put the fear of God in someone.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. we were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm not going to break it. Amount to anything. That's all, Mark. That max acceleration? No. Man, you are really bouncing. Is he on the ground at all? That's 10 kilometers.
So these stories keep coming out. They don't stop. A gentleman named Vito Saccheri, back in the late 70s, had read a book by a fellow named George Leonard, Somebody Else is on the Moon. In fact, Ingo Swann wrote about this same book. So in 1979, he goes with another engineer, friend of his, and arranged to go to Houston's NASA headquarters and asked to see moon photos. NASA had a check with Langley, CIA, and they said, okay, you can do it. It was quite a surprise. Strict rules, he was allowed 3 days, 8-hour days, no writing, no recording devices, and he would not be allowed to be left alone with photos. So what does he see? This is Saccheri's words. Obvious machinery on the surface, showing bolted sections, a UFO rising from the surface and photographed directly above a crater. The unmistakable figure of a rectangular structure placed squarely in the biggest crater pictured, a perfect three-dimensional view. He also read a transcript from one of the Apollo missions. And the words, this is what they said. Houston, we've got a bogey at 2 o'clock. Roger that. Apollo switching to Alpha. Roll 8 degrees and begin sequence. Alpha and Bravo were two switching stations for secured or classified communications. So they continue the discussion on Alpha. And another mission, he reads, Mission Control, we got Santa Claus coming over the hill. Roger, Apollo, hold your fix, switching Bravo. Do you copy? Roger, Houston, Bravo link.
He didn't want us to go any further. We got a call back and said, all right, we'll make arrangements. Turned out to be more than 1,000 pictures. But the resolution was very high. And at that moment, the whole occasion turned. It became almost solemn. Because we knew what we were looking at. And we knew what it meant. There are structures there. There were pipelines. The bridges were clear as a bell. There was machinery. There were tank tracks, what appeared to be tank tracks. When I looked at those clear images, we knew that we were looking at an existing, or at least an ancient technology. But it was clear they were trying to discourage us.
As we conclude this journey, which suggests that there's a hidden presence on the moon, I'd like to encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Could someone be observing us from Earth's celestial neighbor? The intrigue deepens. Don't forget to hit that like button. Please subscribe for more cosmic content and ring that notification bell to stay updated on our cosmic adventures. I've been Dan Dubs. This is Dub Shack TV. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and until next time, stay curious.